Hello and welcome to Hash Rugby Chat here on New Zealand Sport Radio. Hi, I'm Paul and I'll be your host, and joining me this evening is Stephen Harris. How you doing, sir?
Very good, thank you, Paul. Privilege and a pleasure to be on board.
Sorry, folks. I'm struggling to get my beer open because the ring pull bit has pulled off. I'm having a disaster here at the beginning of the show. But hey, we'll soldier on through despite that anyway. On the show this evening, some really big topics to discuss. So first up, we have obviously the vote for the chairman of World Rugby, or Bill Beaumont beating Augustin Pichot. So we'll look into that and we'll break down how and why it all happened. Then New Zealand Rugby have come out and mentioned their their finances. So we'll have a look at that because there is some really eye-opening figures in there. We'll also talk about Super Rugby because we've got a number of reviews going on, and we've got Sanzar saying nothing's going to change, folks. It's all smoke and mirrors. So we'll discuss that piece. And then if we have time, we'll also have a look at the return to play protocols as we drop down through the levels, the COVID levels. Good evening, Simon, in the live chat there. As always, folks, the best place to watch New Zealand Sport Radio is on our Facebook page, but you can also find us on YouTube and on Twitter or Periscope as well under the Driving Maul channels. And this show will be put out as a recording on our podcast. Just search for New Zealand Sport Radio on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Acast, your favorite podcatchers. We are there. So lots of ways you can consume this. You can either watch it live, or you can obviously, as I say, watch it as you drive around and all that kind of stuff. So, Stephen, surprised by the result in the end of the chairmanship vote?
No, I think I sent you a message on, when was it? Probably a day before the announcement, when everything had been pretty much pulled forward, and I thought then that the incumbent would probably come through. And there were just a few whispers around that he would hold on to his position. And no, we shouldn't be surprised, really.
One of the things that I did do is I did a couple of videos for supporters of Driving Maul. You can on drivingmaul.com, and you can become a supporter. You can head over there and onto the website, and you can sign up. It's only $1 a month, or as much as you feel like paying. Where I looked at the breakdown of the different votes, and it came down to understand or guessing where it's obviously a private vote. Now, a number of them countries have come out and said who they voted for, and the other ones have been deduced to come up with the number. But I thought it was going to be a lot closer than it was. I thought it was going to come down to 1 or 2 votes. The fact that it was a 4-vote margin in the end was, to me, the margin was surprising rather than necessarily the actual result itself.
Yeah, we thought it was going to be a close contest. We obviously looked at the numbers a couple of weeks back, and it looked really, really close that it could gone either way. And jumping on a lot of the social network over the weekend, once the decision was made, a lot seems to have been pointed at the Pacific Islands, Fiji, and obviously Samoa. But there were other areas of the world that were a little bit of a surprise at the end of the day. The African nations, who I understand are in the same building as South Africa, Paul, and of course Canada as well, and the oddity of Japan as well. That that was one that could have probably gone either way. You'd think they were a bit of an ally, but then you also think about what happened in and around Super Rugby when South Africa didn't support Japan as well. So yeah, there's a lot of politics going on, and even late in the piece, things were happening.
Yeah, they were. So let's bring up this graphic. Oh, wow, he's here. He's made it at last. The silver fox himself, John. How are you doing, O'Connor?
I like to call it ash blonde.
Ash blonde. Oh, sorry.
So get your as foxy as ever, but ash blonde. Hello, boys.
Hello, and yes, sorry, Christopher, for calling you Christian in the live chat. Yes, I'm trying to handle multiple things at the same time. the important thing, sorry about getting your name wrong, that's obviously important, but even more important is the fact I've managed to get the bottle top off my beer at last. So
all is well.
There.
It's going to be okay.
The world is now a better place because Paul can pour his Max Gold. Other beers are available. Max have not sponsored the show yet.
So I just want to know, are we even talking to people from the UK? Stephen? Regular Stephen? Normal Stephen? As opposed to good-looking Steve?
I'm not 100% sure, but we've already got a few people on the line at the moment. It's Charlene joining us, Christopher Edwards Bailey's joining us this evening. So fantastic to see. I've got to ask you about that hair though, John. It's got looks like it's developed a mind of its own.
It's a COVID-19 hairstyle. That's all I'm saying. I just want to know after the Six Nations pulled their normal story when it came to a vote, whether we even are talking to Steve.
Talking to Paul, you mean?
I mean, Paul. No, we always talk to Steve. He needs somebody to talk to him. He's a Blues supporter, so he needs all the help he can get.
So, okay, let's bring up the actual map itself and let's talk through how the votes panned out. Thank you very much to I've gone blank. You can see it in the bottom right hand corner, but at Rugby Blogger for permission to use his graphic here that I brought up on screen. In the live chat, if it's too small, then let us know. I'll put it full screen. I'll take our lovely pretty faces off. But if otherwise, we'll discuss it through. We'll talk this through. So start off then. We'll go left to right on the map. Canada red. Sorry, Bill Beaumont's red, and Augustin Pichot is blue on the map. So Canada went with Bill Beaumont, but the USA went with Augustin Pichot, and then they split the North America regional votes, one each. I was a bit surprised by the Canadian one, but Canada. I mean, Stephen, you were talking about the fact that Canada's been going backwards in the last sort of decade, really now, and that their administration, let's be honest, is an absolute mess up there. So perhaps not so much of a surprise that they've gone with the incumbents. They talked about stability in this time of turbulence being the reason why they went with Beaumont. I thought that perhaps them getting included in the American Rugby Championship might have had something, but what are your thoughts there, Stephen?
Yeah, I have to agree. I was just actually going to go down that particular path. Obviously, they didn't have a lot of international rugby. We're talking about the Canucks, Canada, and they were thrown a lifeline by Argentina with that Central American competition. So I don't think Argentina would be overly impressed about that. So once again, we don't really know, but I know Argentina would be disappointed more than anybody else, the fact that they probably didn't support the vote at the end of the day.
Look, just looking at that breakdown there. Some things, the key points here is we knew that, we expected England, France, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and Italy to vote with Beaumont to maintain whatever they are currently getting at the expense of others. That's what the Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So the real surprises are the Fiji, Samoa.
Well, actually, John, you're rushing ahead.
Yeah?
Let's deal with the Americas first. We'll make our way across the map. But
I'll make across the map. So the Canadian one is one that I don't suppose anybody really knew what they would do, because I don't think people who are involved on the ground in Canadian rugby know what the administration is going to do. So who knows what the rest of the world has got no clue what Canada's administration is going to do. We could have Mikey on here talking about his frustrations for, I don't know, an hour at least with Canadian rugby.
Yeah, you're right. I got in a bit of a Twitter discussion with somebody from Canada and someone from Argentina, because the South American president of the South American area came out rather scathing against Canada. And one of the points that he made was, look, yes, Canada's been invited into this competition, but it's against the Argentinian B team. I mean, the Argentinian don't even put their first team into it. So he says, look, it's they're not even giving us tier 1 games. They're giving us lower games than that. At least we get to play the Six Nations occasionally, or we'll get one of the Six Nations each summer.
Well, that's what's happened
originally for a game in
Promises
June.
have been made. Promises have been made. Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, no, but they actually have games against they have been having games against Italy and Scotland during the June window for the past sort of 8 or so years. The last time Canada played a tier 1 nation outside Rugby World Cup, not within living memory.
You don't count. You don't count Scotland. You don't. Oh, you mean Southern Hemisphere? I thought you were saying you don't count Scotland as a tier 1 nation anymore.
No. Sorry, the Six Nations. The Six Nations have, or some of the Six Nations tier 1 teams have played them. The Rugby Championship they've not had a full Test match against the Rugby Championship side within living memory, and I think that's part of what has perhaps also caused their vote. Whereas we know the All Blacks have played the USA, the Maori All Blacks have played the USA, the Wallabies have played the USA, all within the last decade. So and in the USA, generally in I've gone blank into the sea. Chicago.
And remember, South Africa also played the USA under Alistair Coetzee. So that is what, 3-4 years ago. They played them in Washington, albeit with the B squad, because they had a Test match on the other side of the world a week later. But they did play an official Test against them.
No, are you talking about the Wales game? They played Wales in Washington DC.
That's right. You're 100% correct. It wasn't. You're 100% correct. It wasn't the States. It was Wales. But at least they played it in the States. Right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So they played. So there's been connections between the USA and the Rugby Championship teams, but not Canada. Moved down south. Unsurprisingly, Argentina, Uruguay, and the 2 South America votes all went with the Ghost MP show. I'm not sure there's much to discuss there. I think that's just obvious that's going to happen. The only discussion point that might be had here, actually probably should wait to get to Australia, but is that to get the Australia on board, Argentina had given up their attempt at the 2027 Rugby World Cup, or their bid for that, and they're throwing their lot behind the Australian one.
Okay, hang on, just rewind for a second here. Can I just ask on this, and thank you so much to the person who did this graphic here, but just so that I understand it, under Bill Beaumont, it says North and Central America, 1 of 2, but then it also lists Canada, Fiji, Samoa, and Canada. Was there another vote in North and Central America besides the USA and Canada?
Yes, if you look at the graphic, obviously the countries are coloured, but you see there's also 6 circles around there. That's because the North Central America, South America, Europe, Africa's, Asia, and Oceania organizations all get 2 votes each.
Okay, so there's a vote from Canada, plus there was 1 of the 2 votes from the North and Central America region.
Yep.
So that would be like Mexico, Honduras, Nicaragua, Venezuela, the Caribbean, all of that kind of stuff.
Plus also the USA and Canada would have a say in that as well.
Okay, all right. So I just was making sure I understand it. So they split the North and Central America vote, which I suppose is without knowing the intricacies, that makes sense. And then now you're getting really interesting. So Argentina have thrown their lot in behind the 2027 Australia bid for the World Cup.
Correct. Yep.
Well, then I see trouble coming. By the way, as a side branch, because remember South Africa got shafted for the 2022 one, right? So you would think that they have a huge expectation that they will be awarded the next one. Oh, sorry, the 2023 one. You would think that they expect to get the 2027 one after being so badly diddled. So if Australia is going after that as well, then we could see all sorts of fun and games in the SANZAAR organization.
Actually, I think John makes a really good point. Paul, because with
Always.
just suspect there's a lot of good on you. There's a lot of
don't sound so surprised, Steve.
Yeah, I was going to try and you can never get a word in with this guy. Paul, you should have just cut him off before you got
I guess one of the points
can I just finish my point?
There were 3 announced bidders for the 2027 Rugby World Cup. Just to close off on this one, they were Argentina, Australia, and Russia. South Africa were not an announced bidder for 2027 currently. That doesn't mean so those are the 3 announced bidders at this time. Now it's not up to a vote yet, and they may be. I'm not sure when the deadlines are, but I think it is. So currently, it looks like South Africa. So the USA and South Africa are both speculating that they'll announce their interest in the event, but they haven't announced anything yet officially.
Sure.
Sorry, go on, Stephen.
I was about to say, guys, when the 2027 Cup rolls round, or we find out who is hosting that particular World Cup, it'll be great to keep this graph, because I think it'll be a little bit of an insight into basically whoever the host is of that tournament is. I think there'll be a little bit of a pattern involved, don't you think?
On that note, moving across to Africa, Steve and I were very surprised by the fact that Africa voted for Bill Beaumont, whereas South Africa voted for Augustin Pichot. Now, what someone has said, and I'm just going to I've just quickly Googled this, which I should have done beforehand, was that they thought that basically Africa had voted for France, not for South Africa, for the Rugby World Cup 2023. So there's a history of Africa not voting in the same way that South Africa does. So that was interesting about that. So so as I say, it surprised me that they went different ways, but apparently, I say the Africa did have done that before. They voted differently to South Africa, which is a bit of a surprise.
If I can comment on that, Steve, I don't know if you've got something you'd like to add.
No, you go, Paul. Oh, sorry, John.
No worries. So historically, between South Africa and Africa, and this is post-apartheid, I'm not talking in the apartheid times, but post-apartheid, there has been on both sides a little bit of a divide insofar as some South Africans, and I'm talking about black South Africans, almost see themselves as not part of Africa. And parts of Africa think that South Africa don't see themselves as part of Africa. And so there's a little bit of an attitude towards South Africa and a little bit of attitude from South Africa towards Africa, this kind of stigma on both sides. And just as an aside, a funny story, probably early 2000s or around 2000, I heard the story of a delegation of diplomats from South Africa landing in Tanzania at the airport, and they had to walk to the terminus. There was a problem with the bus. They were walking from the plane, and this is a delegation, and somebody from the press was walking with them and overheard these diplomats, black South African diplomats, walking in the heat of Tanzania and Central Africa towards the terminus. And the one guy turns to the other and said, "Yo, we're in Africa now, eh?" So, and they're just flown from Johannesburg. So there is a little bit of a tension sometimes between Africa and South Africa when it comes to attitudes. However, I really hoped that my hope for the win of South Africa at the World Cup, when Siya Kolisi lifted that World Cup trophy, my hope was that it would light a fire when it comes to rugby throughout Africa. To see such a exemplary black leader lift that trophy, I thought that it would break down a lot of that, at least in the rugby circles, that sort of attitude. And I had huge hope that it would just, spread rugby throughout the Africa region. So to see this voting continue along this way is very disappointing. And I also wonder, look for some interesting things to happen in the next, I don't know, the next few years. Look at funding towards the Africa rugby regions to be increased, or something. There's been some horse trading happening here somehow.
Well, I think it needs to be a bit. We'll see about that. But the rugby. So, Simon makes a good point. Rugby Africa has strong ties with France, and the administrators all being based in North Africa. And yeah, remember, France did have a strong colonial presence in Africa. They have maintained ties with those colonial countries post them being colonial countries as well. So it's and you got to say that. So you can understand that part of it. So Simon, as I say, points out that that there is those ties are there. And if we look back at that 2023 vote for France, they got Scotland, they got Italy, they also got Japan, Asia, South America, Europe, Africa, Georgia, Romania. They all voted for France at for that Rugby World Cup. So a lot of the Tier 2 crowd and a lot of the regional associations voted for France there. Even though Africa has stayed kind of with the Six Nations, Europe, South America, Asia, they've all moved over to actually no, Europe stayed, but South Africa and Asia have moved, and that was so it's not a perfect correlation between World Cup voting and this voting.
Well, just a quick question. You've got a country like Tunisia, which is French speaking, and there was another country up that way. I know Abdel Benazir, the former Frenchman, was from that particular area. Do they get a vote as well? And if they do get to vote, wouldn't they align themselves with France as well?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that they'll be part of that. I don't know exactly which countries have got associations within Africa that are part of the Africa group, but yeah, people like Tunisia, etc., would be part of that. Looking to Europe, then obviously the Six Nations all voted for Bill Beaumont. We knew that was going to happen, and Europe did too. The only controversy coming out of that is that Germany complained after the vote that they hadn't been given a proper say in, and that the countries hadn't been consulted properly around how those two European votes would go. So interesting that now that seems to have gone very quiet very quickly, and there doesn't be much follow up on that one. But that did come out, which was interesting.
Sure.
The
Japan, so the Europe single vote. So it was a single vote from Europe.
Well, because there's an association that covers all of Europe, just like there's one that covers all of South America.
Okay, I'm with you.
And those two votes went to Bill Beaumont, as you can tell by the red circle. But Germany says they didn't get a say in that, because obviously you've got teams like Germany, Spain, Portugal, Russia. They all have rugby teams, but they don't. Belgium, etc. They're all part of World Rugby, but they aren't strong. They aren't big enough to have a solid vote themselves. But they get a say through their regional association.
Spain, by the way, just has been doing really well on the Seventh Circuit. And Germany dominates the Tier 2 Seventh Circuit, and they've put a huge amount of effort to raise their game and been desperately close to qualifying for the main tour, the main Sevens tour, yearly tour, at least twice now. So these are two countries that are obviously doing something right.
Absolutely, they're going the right direction. Even if Spain lost their opportunity to get to the World Cup in Japan because they fielded an ineligible player, but never mind about that. Same happened to Romania. Romania and Georgia, they both voted for Augustin Pichot. Obviously, both of those two countries looking at trying to get Tier 1 status and access to Tier 1 competitions, which is one of the things that he promised. So unsurprising that they've gone down that route. You've got to say USA like that, but Canada wouldn't be, for example. And say no, that it's not good enough. Moving over to Asia, the Asia vote again. Most of the countries, Rich Freeman posted a list of how the vote went, but the vast majority all went for Augustin Pichot. Two countries voted for Bill Beaumont out of that collective block, and hence that's why both votes went to Augustin Pichot. Probably the most transparent out of any of the groups as to how and why their votes happened, which is very good from Asia for being like that. Japan, and I think we'll probably include Fiji and Samoa in here, going for Beaumont, not going for Augustine Pichot. Now, John, you were talking about that, saying you're kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, because let's be honest, right? That the Northern Hemisphere has not looked after the islands. I'm not saying that the two countries closest to them, that's New Zealand, which is where I live, and Australia, have not taken advantage of them in gleefully helping themselves to players that were good enough to play for the Wallabies or the All Blacks, and not really having many qualms about ever trying to play a test match in the islands. So from that perspective, I'm not saying Australia and New Zealand have covered themselves with good intentions, at least towards the islands, but they have done some things to help the islands. At least take Super Rugby games there, for instance. But so far as the Northern Hemisphere and the Six Nations is concerned, they've had very, very little interest in the well-being of rugby in the islands. And for Fiji and Samoa to vote for Bill Beaumont, very surprising.
I'll disagree on this one. Crystal puts a good point in there that the Northern Hemisphere have played 20 tests in the Pacific Islands since professionalism. And they also play tier one games against Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga in the November window. Now I know that's in the those are away games and they don't get funding, but they do get games, whereas on a regular basis. Whereas there was a good article put together by Jim Kays on the Newsroom, where he points out that the Wallabies have played Samoa and Tonga 5 times and 4 times in Australia, but never in the islands. They've played 3 times in Fiji, but not since 1984. South Africa have yet to play in Samoa, Tonga, or Fiji, and they've hosted Tonga in Cape Town, but that was back in '97. They played Fiji back in '96 in South Africa, and they played Samoa 5 times in South Africa, which again is better than the All Blacks. The All Blacks, again, the first time they ever played in Samoa was back in 2015 as a warm-up test, and they charged $1 million for that. They've never played in Tonga. They haven't played in Fiji since 1984. And then also the only games they've had in New Zealand have been warm-ups for, it's like, oh, quick, we need someone to warm up to play the Lions. Oh, quick, we need someone to warm up to play before the Rugby World Cup. That's the only time. So Tonga got that game last year. I think it was Samoa got the game before the Lions, and Fiji got the game before the 2015 Rugby World Cup. But again, it's once every 4 years that they actually get a game, whereas every year they get a game in Europe, not funding. But then again, they don't get funding when they get a share of the pot when they come to New Zealand either. And they do get visited by Scotland, by Italy occasionally in the islands, and there's talk of, especially during Lions years, of maybe England or one of the other bigger or Wales or Ireland going as well. So because when Wales played, they were supposed to play Tonga in Tonga, but because the ground hadn't been built, they played that double header at Eden Park, didn't they?
That's right.
Before the Lions.
Yes.
So the and Simon, you're quite right. John Campbell was a big part of putting pressure on the All Blacks to play in Samoa. So you can see, look, sure, the Northern Hemisphere teams, the Six Nations aren't giving them a tier 1 competition, but they're the other side of the world. Are they visiting every year with top sides? Not every year. but they do visit sometimes. So I think,
No,
but
but hang on.
Gone with Pete Show.
No, but hang on here. But yes, they give them games, right? But quite often they give them games in the same way that New Zealand does, which is as a warm-up to something major coming up against one of the Southern Hemisphere teams. Certainly, without doubt, New Zealand and Australia and South Africa can have done way better to visit there and play there and help them generate funds. And the fact that New Zealand charged $1 million, it's obscene, right? When you consider the incredible input going way back, Brian Williams, and before that, players that have originated, if not born in Samoa, or had come from Samoan family, if they might have been born in New Zealand. But there are other issues here besides just games. For instance, it was the decision to ensure that a player who might qualify for the islands and had played for another country could never play again for the islands, was a loophole that was gleefully closed 20 odd years ago, 25 years ago. And by doing that, the islands have been hugely disadvantaged without having a stand-down period where somebody could come back. Remember, these were days when Steve, you can help me out here. It was Stephen Bishop that played both for the All Blacks and Samoa.
Well, I'm letting you go because I'm going to come off the long run very, very shortly. I'm a bit fired up about this. This is not all one-way traffic. Let me give you the tip. But you carry on with your point, John.
Okay. And what was the other one that stands out? Frank Bunce, I think, also played for Samoa as well as the All Blacks. And these are players that have added huge value to both All Black rugby and Samoan rugby, right? Or Island rugby, wherever it may be. And let's just give some credit to these populations, because we know that there have been issues with the administration, whether it's been the actual administration itself or political interference by dictators or whatever it may be over the last 20 years in some of these island nations. But there was a stage maybe 3-4 years ago where during the Northern Hemisphere November window, where I think it was 6 non-Fijian nations were playing with Fijian wings. So these are nations that have added hugely to rugby in a number of countries. Off you go, Steve.
Okay. Listen, I've sat back and listened, and listen, my first attack is going to be in and around a lot of our journalists. I personally think a lot of New Zealand journalists are lazy, absolutely lazy when it actually comes to doing a little bit of homework. There are a lot of Pacific Island-born players that are born in New Zealand that have either born in New Zealand or come to New Zealand, and they've come through the New Zealand rugby structure. And there's a lot of those kids that have never made the All Blacks, but have ended up playing international rugby, have ended up getting professional contracts overseas, and that's because of the New Zealand structure. I'm a great believer of you don't bite the hand that feeds you. If somebody gives me an opportunity in life, I never forget that. And I just think it's a little bit rich to come off the fence and say New Zealand's done absolutely nothing. Hell's teeth, that their structure, it's the New Zealand structure that makes you better players. You've got the option whether you want to play the All Blacks or you want to play international footy. As for some of the Northern Hemisphere teams, it's all very well. They play the odd sort of match down in the islands, and they play up in the Northern Hemisphere. But on the other hand, those Celtic nations are the very nations who basically voted against the Pacific Island teams, having, say, a 1 or 2 test All Black come across and basically play for them. We spoke about a Ben Artinga this morning who played 1 test for the All Blacks. God, he would have been ideal for either Samoa and Tonga. So this is not just a one-way street. This is actually a two-way street. It's about getting opportunities and taking them. Nobody holds a gun to these kids' heads. And if you're a father in Samoa where there's no rugby structure, you're going to send your son to New Zealand to play. And if the opportunity comes to play for the All Blacks, you're going to take it every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Now, the other thing is, when you talk about administration in the islands, it's a shambles. It's an absolute shambles. It's crooked. It's been like that for a very, very long time. The Samoan, I mean to say, both unions are run by their respective presidents. And we know one of them's a bit of a tyrant. The other guy, the Samoan president, a few years ago, New Zealand was the country that supported Samoa when the tsunami was over there. Most of the allocated food money went over there, and a lot of that disappeared under his regime. This is what we're talking about here. That's a very, very crooked regime, and one of the reasons why New Zealand hasn't gone up there, they haven't really trusted them. So it's really simple just to come off the fence and basically say New Zealand don't support Pacific Island rugby. In my opinion, that's BS. It's as simple as that. And I'm really disappointed. All they've seen, all the likes of Fiji has seen, is a bag of cash from France. That's all they've seen. Cash, a one-off opportunity. And I'm pretty convinced there's some backroom deals going on there. There you go. Those are my thoughts on the chat line. They may not agree with me, but all I'm asking here is basically for balance when we're talking about that, because a lot of lazy journalists, especially, and some very good journalists who should know better, don't actually do the homework. Now, as somebody who's been down at grassroots level as a coach and also a manager, I've seen a lot of Pacific Island players come through the system. The likes of Sentius Johnson, James Johnson, Joe Takuri, guys who have all ended up playing for Samoa. And that's absolutely fantastic. And those kids made an early decision at an early age. Sometimes you've got to know what your ceiling is. Look, a lot of Pacific Island kids want to be All Blacks. But in reality, you've got to ask yourself, if there's an opportunity to get an overseas contract and play for Samoa and Tonga, man, go for it. And if there's an opportunity to let these kids, even if they've played one or two tests for the All Blacks, play international rugby, it could only be good for the game. The best thing the Celtic nations can do is basically let this happen. But you know why they won't? We all know why that won't happen.
Just one thing I want to cover off on here, and we've talked about it, or it's been mentioned a couple of times, is about the cash. Now, I think one of the things that we are not saying here is that there's under the table cash going on, that it is cash that is allocated by World Rugby, and it's kind of it's above it's visible. You can see how the money gets to the islands. Quite what happens to it once it gets there is a different ball game. But I don't think we're suggesting that Bill Beaumont or Laporte have been giving sort of underhand cash to these locations, but they have. But one of the other things that has been mentioned is that one of the reasons that Fiji and Samoa went for Beaumont is that they saw that Augustin Pichot was looking at expanding rugby, which I think a lot of us say is a noble idea and the right way to go. From a selfish point of view, what they're seeing though is that I'm not sure we needed to know, Raw Rugby, that you were in the shower while you're listening to us, by the way. But anyway,
the mind boggles.
That's just thrown my thought entirely.
Just don't put your pieces up. Just
listen, Raw. Listen, Raw.
Then you're
listen,
get
Raw. Don't. You've missed a spot.
You missed us. Yeah, Raw Rugby. You need someone to scratch. You need someone to loofah your back for you. So yeah, it's absolutely, and this is one of the problems I have with people saying, "Oh yeah, look, it's obvious everyone should have one vote each." Now, my problem with that is exactly what you've been talking about there, Stephen. Is around: do we want people on the board having a vote who are basically not fit and proper? Now, Fiji and Samoa here are having a vote. Whereas Tonga isn't. You're kind of like, well, what's the difference between Tonga and Fiji and Samoa? The difference is around how mature their administration is. That Fiji and Samoa actually have their accounts audited. They actually are recognised by the Olympic Organisation. They are actually recognised by other organisations as well. Tonga does not meet those categories, so that's why they don't get. That's why they haven't yet. That's why we don't see Tonga having a vote here, even though they go to the same World Cups. They go to they meet all the other eligibility criteria, but they don't meet the fit and proper criteria. The fact that we've now got, we had someone who was going to get onto the executive board, who is a known killer. Now, whether you call it manslaughter or murder, that's up to you. But he's definitely a killer. He's been convicted of it. Was going to be one of the people voting and having a voice in how rugby is run. Yeah, I'm not comfortable with that. So I think we do need to be a bit careful as to when Augustin Pichot goes and says, "Yeah, let's give them votes," or or one country, one vote. Yeah, I'm yes, but there need to be standards to allow that vote, I think. But yeah, the Pacific Islands have been treated badly by everybody to a certain degree, and they have been treated. They've been treated well by everyone to a certain degree. I think there is a misconception here that everybody, what the Pacific Islanders want is that eligibility stuff. If you listen to some of the players, they don't mind. They're happy for their co-players to go overseas and play for another country, and they see that as them representing their culture and doing well. The one thing they would like to have is the opportunity to stay in the Pacific Islands and be able to play rugby and earn a living. So be that a Super Rugby team in Fiji, or be that they're not included in the 3 foreigner rule in the New Zealand Super Rugby franchises. That's the one thing. That's one area that I think they could have that a lot of goodwill could have been bought in that space. Jim Keyes makes a good point that under the last TV deal, the amount of money doubled. Now, New Zealand, South Africa, and Australia decided, and Argentina to a lesser extent, so I don't think they were necessarily involved at that point, but to basically, we need that cash for ourselves, rather than saying, now is a good opportunity that we've had a big pay rise to spend some of that cash in either building Japan or building the Pacific Island team. And I think that was a missed opportunity at that time.
Absolutely. Can I ask just a slightly left turn question, but it is related to this whole situation? Some years ago, so this is probably around 09 or 10, something about 10 years ago, maybe. I can't remember the exact dates. I'm sure Paul can look it up if he goes on Google. But Steve, you can answer this here. I was living in
what we're talking about yet.
Yes, I'm keeping you hanging on. Hang there. Sit there poised. Sit there poised. Get the hands ready there. Paul, that sounds terrible. Stephen, the Pacific Island team that played 2 or 3 games, right? And hugely impressed me when they played. I saw them, their first match was against the All Blacks, albeit that Richie in that it was given an official test status. It was a joint selection. For those of you who don't know, you're listening from the Northern Hemisphere. It was a joint selection among all the island teams. It was given official test status. And their first match against the All Blacks, I thought the only reason the All Blacks didn't lose that game was Marty Holler. I thought, but for Marty Holler, who was filling in for Richie McCaw, they would have lost that game. And Sione Luaki was absolutely magnificent. Wow. And in short order got selected into the All Black squad after that. Then they played, I think, the South Africans in Australia a week later. And that was maybe a bridge too far. Obviously, many of these players hadn't experienced playing that level of test rugby against those nations 1 week apart. And they were beaten, not thumped, but they weren't close. Whereas the All Black Test match was very close. That the All Blacks lost.
The scores in those games: New Zealand beat the Pacific Islanders 41-26, and South Africa beat the Pacific Islanders 38-24.
Right. So the 41-26 is not an indicator of that game.
Right.
There was a late try scored there, I think, as they were pushing. So it was, I think, 34-26. And I think the Islanders were pushing. But there was a long stretch of that game where they had complete control of the All Blacks. And time after time, Marty Holler turned the ball over inside the All Black 22 and saved them, right? So although the gap looks big, that was a much closer game than that score. And the 38-24 was a much more comfortable win. But be that as it may, I thought here is an experiment that really this can take off, because the style of rugby they played and the depth of talent that they had, I just thought these guys have this is the first time they're playing together. This is a great thing that's happening here. What happened, Steve?
Oh, listen, just to give you an idea, Sitivini Sivivatu, Selala Mapasua, Ceremony by Lomi Fato, guys like that, Suani Tongahuia, a lot of those guys were actually playing in New Zealand, a lot of provincial rugby at the time. I think maybe even I think on Paul's show that he did with, or interview, the long chat with Junior Polianganga, I think that Barbarians team was mentioned, and I thought to myself, what a wonderful opportunity right then for World Rugby at the time to have basically sanctioned that team to play every year. And you know what? I'm convinced some of those guys would have actually stayed with the Pacific Island Barbarians. It's about seizing the day.
It wasn't called the Barbarians team. That's the thing. It wasn't given the Barbarians moniker. It was called the Pacific Islands. Pacific
Islanders. But why can't they basically do something like, we see the British and Irish Lions touring every, 4, 8, 12 years?
4 years. 4 years.
Every 4 years. Why couldn't we see that with the Pacific Islanders? That's the opportunity. I keep thinking, at the end of the day, with World Rugby, we talk about the governance in the islands. Okay, it's all very well looking at their books. Put your own person in there. Put one of your own people in there to run it, for crying out loud, if the locals can't do the job. No, I'm sorry. World Rugby's had an opportunity and they've dropped the ball. And the All Blacks have seen a loophole. I mean, I say Sione Loaki, oh my God, what a beast. I know that Richie McCoy has nightmares about Sione Loaki in one particular Crusaders Chiefs game.
Yes.
Because we'd love to see these guys playing for their own countries. But, there's a loophole there, and every international team in World Rugby at the moment is cottoned onto it.
So let's be interesting that Niue and the Cook Islands also provided players for the 2004 for games when they played. So thank you for pointing that out, Christopher. Just check that out. So in that 2004, they played the Queensland, New South Wales, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. They reformed 2 years later in 2006 and went and played Wales, Scotland, Ireland. And reformed in 2008 and played England, France, and Italy. Now, in 2009, Samoa said they were pulling out and said that they didn't want to take part anymore. Yeah, we did talk about it during that interview with Junior, and he mentions how much he liked it and he loved the idea. I think and one of the reasons, for example, that it's taken a long time for GB to have a football team at the Olympics is because Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales don't want to lose their own personal identity when a Team GB happens, and they were scared of losing So you do wonder, would the individual countries have lost their own identity
for the World Cup?
And that was maybe the fear that they had.
Can I just point out one thing here, and that is, Steve, you're such a New Zealand rugby fan. You're better than most, I must admit, because you went. The Lions tour every 12 years. No, they tour New Zealand every 12 years, Steve. In the interim, they tour. I know that doesn't count to a New Zealand rugby fan, but they do tour every 4 years.
Oh no, I disagree with that. They only tour every 12 years.
12 years. There we go. It's
a real interesting, that Pacific Islanders concept. I think is a is a brilliant concept. But like I say, I come back to some of the journalistic work that does. It's easy just to purely blame a country without basically going through all these steps. There's so many layers to this, and why things like this are happening. I want to see I want to see the Pacific Island teams be successful. If you look at the likes of Samoa, 1991, like Canada, I think they were a World Cup quarterfinalist, if I stand to be corrected.
That's right.
And all of a sudden, we're really excited. When you see something exciting happening, whether it's your own child growing up, you nurture that, don't you? You nurture that and make sure that it comes through to the top. You don't basically push it back. If there's an opportunity to bring somebody up, do it. And once again, World Rugby, they just keep dropping the ball in a lot of areas. We'll talk about they do this and they do that, but the big ticket items that count at the end of the day. But I'm sorry, but they fall asleep at the wheel.
Steve, so you would think that most parents, when they see their children coming up, would continue to lift them up. But there are some parents who see themselves as being threatened by somebody new and strong and the young bull coming through the house, right? So you and I both have sons. You know that whole story about he can't walk past you without giving you a little bit of a shoulder, right? At a certain age. And just like, I'm coming for you, Dad, right? But unfortunately, these islands provide talent, not just to New Zealand, not just to Australia, because count how many Fijian-born or Fijian-qualified players are now playing for Australia. They provide talent for the UK, for England. They provide talent for Wales. They're across the board. They're providing talent. And so this is not to the personal benefit of the strong nations. And unfortunately, we've seen over the years a series of decisions that have been taken that are not in the best interests of the game of rugby. They are in the best interests of individual unions or individual competitions rather than the good of the game.
I agree with that. And let's before we do but how much there's an element of fear in those teams. We talked about the relegation from the Six Nations, for example. With sort of Scotland and Ireland have both mentioned that they're scared that they're not happy with that. But I think there's also an element here of rugby is a sport that basically spends more money than it earns.
That's the problem,
right? And so every time you talk about, let's expand this or do that or do this, there's a playing side, but there's also a financial side that a lot of the administrators are actually spending more time concentrating on than the playing side. And a lot of their voting is about that as well. And so they're going, well, yes, we like the idea of you expanding. That's a great idea, but you got to do it without taking any cash off me. In fact, I need more cash. So give me more cash and do that as well. And World Rugby then is like, well, there isn't more cash to do that. There isn't enough cash to go around. And so there's I think there has been a bit of a wake up call, hopefully, over this last couple of months that will be a driver for a bit of change around that sustainability side, around the cost side. We'll have to wait and see. We're not going to get on to looking at the New Zealand finances or talking about Super Rugby. That will be next week. What I was going to do is wanted to very quickly have a look at Bill Beaumont's manifesto. Have you had a chance to read that, boys?
No.
Okay, fine. So he's breaking it down into basically 5 points. So one is governance, which is a point that Augustine Pichot brought up, and a point you've been bringing up as well, Stephen, is that look, dropping the ball, being asleep at the wheel, the government isn't fit for purpose.
Paul, just quickly
looking at the global season, but a lot of things he's saying in there are, we'll set a committee up to look at that. And I'm like, you've been there for 4 years. Don't you know what the answer is already? You're not. You don't get another 4 years. You're only now to be in this post for 2 terms, and so Bill Beaumont cannot be voted in again. You'd think he'd want to be arriving now with the ideas to implement over these next 4 years, not spend the next year and a half, 2 years trying to figure out what those ideas are to implement in 2 years' time.
Paul, I'm just going to jump in. Just some other thing which I just completely forgot as well, and I refer back to the Junior Puleongunga interview where he was playing towards the end of his career. I think he was playing for your club, Exeter, and they wouldn't release him to play in the Rugby World Cup. Was that just the recent Rugby World Cup gone last year, or was that 2000? Was that 2015?
Might have been 2011.
Was 2011. See, that's another issue as well. Although I suppose you can't blame World Rugby for that because they're not paying the bills directly at the end of the day. But on saying that, if they are an organisation worth their salt and they want to see the best players at their World Cup, they would be doing a little bit more, whether it's some sort of compensation. You know, I can't see why a club during a Rugby World Cup period can't get a lone player from somewhere just basically to cover them. And if the cost is covered by the rugby by World Rugby, wouldn't that be a good answer?
Yeah, in that interview he talks about that. Look, he signed up, and he when he signed up, he made the proviso that he wasn't going to go to the Rugby World Cup, and now the club planned around that. And then when he decided to go, they said, "Look, we can't pay you while you're away because we have to use that money to get someone in to backfill you." Was their excuse. Now, I think that is very wrong by Exeter Chiefs. Yes, they're my team, but I think it's wrong. But you can see their logic there is, look, we've paid for you to play for us, but we're going to be down an experienced scrum half, so we're going to go get. I think it was Nick White. No, not Nick White. It was an Australian guy. But then he ended up staying for the season, and Junior lost his place in the squad. They ended up having one extra scrum half than they really needed, and he didn't get to play much. And what that has unfortunately done, if you now look at the Exeter squad, is, and this is something I kind of thought about after I had that conversation with him, but he did that. We had Nadolo arrived on his Australian passport rather than his Fijian passport, and therefore wasn't considered a Pacific Islander. So the club got deducted points for fielding too many overseas players because Pacific Islanders don't count on that. And he also got caught we had a police issue as well while he was there. And if you look now, Exeter doesn't hire Pacific Island players. They hire South African players, but they've not had a Pacific Island player for a number of years now. And probably Junior and Naholo were probably the last that they had there. So it's changed their entire recruitment policy. But yeah, it's the and Simon, part of the regulation. Yeah, you're right. Clubs can it's Regulation 9 we're talking about here. Now so it's basically Exeter's answer to it now has been, we don't hire Pacific Island players, which is detrimental to for obviously those players wanting to go overseas and earn cash, which is sad. But
boys, we're not addressing the core issue here. There's the core issue we talked about. They should release and da. That's not the core issue. Can you imagine the Soccer World Cup being played while England is got its FA Premier League running, or La Liga, or the Spanish Premier League? Of course not. The problem is that there's not a correctly set up world season. So as a result, the World Cup is being played while major competitions, local competitions, are underway. That would never happen in soccer because they want the best players. If you have a world season properly set up, all of these problems disappear. That's the core issue.
That's one of the core issues, right? And that is under the governance thing that Bill Beaumont said. But again, up for discussion. No actual plans or things to say what he thinks should be the answer. Global season.
So was Pisha.
2 point.
We looked at Pisha's manifesto, right? And Pichot's was all
Beaumont.
airy-fairy. Pichot was also all airy-fairy instead of actually saying, this is what we're going to do.
So his idea, Beaumont said, have a new competition structure to roll out post Rugby World Cup 2023. So, folks, don't expect any changes until 2024 at the earliest.
I hope we're still alive. Crikey.
And Paul, remember our bet? You said to me, there's no ways that there's going to be any World Cup games from 2023, any French World Cup games played in among the Six Nations teams that voted against the World Rugby's recommendation that the 23 World Cup go to South Africa and instead voted for France. Remember, you owe me. If there are games that are farmed out to Twickenham, Ulster, to Ireland, etc.
John, Wales voted for South Africa. Okay,
I'm not talking about Wales. I'm talking about the others.
Okay, I understand.
I'm talking about the others. The ones who did.
But look, I don't think we'll see. Well, anyway, that's a by the by.
Remember, Steve.
And then part 3 is to review the World Rugby's financial policy, and that's how do they allocate funds globally? So Christopher, I agree. World Rugby has already approved all stadia, and they're all in France. So anyway, but we let John just live in his fantasy world.
Hey!
Those are 3 main areas. He also has sub things on player welfare. Player welfare is 4, and then women's rugby is number 5. So, we'll see. But as John says there, it's all wishy-washy. So was Augustin Pichot's. Personally, I wasn't excited by either candidate, to be honest.
I agree with you.
Steve, any final thoughts?
No, listen, it's all done, and I suppose the proof will be in the pudding now. If Beaumont is true to his word, I mean, he seems like a decent enough guy, but boy, you're up against a lot of forces, aren't you, fellas?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a big part of it, isn't it? Is that they can promise whatever they like, but whatever they do, they've got to bring back to this forum, as in this old school, new school thing, and try and get it voted through again. And we saw that where it happened when they tried to put the Nations Cup in place, which I know a lot of people in the Tier 2 nations weren't happy with. A lot of people in the Tier 1 nations weren't happy with. So it was far from perfect. But in both cases, do they have the power to get any real change through?
I think you've hit a nail on the head there, Paul. Is that there is too much focus on trying to get something perfect. We live in especially going through what the world is going through at the moment, it needs to be an element of pragmatism while addressing these fundamental core issues. There needs to be both a realization that the core issue, for instance, of what we spoke a little while ago, is not releasing players. The core issue is getting the calendar right. But when you get the calendar right, in inverted commas, is not going to satisfy everybody. But we get a global calendar. So to avoid the core issues, or to avoid the core issues because we don't delve deep enough, or to not address them because we can't find a perfect solution that makes everybody happy, is neither of those are going to work. We need to address core issues and come up with something, right, without pursuing perfection.
Yep, exactly. Good point there. We're not going to have perfection, so let's get something on the table. I'm going to wrap this up, guys, unless you're going to tell me that, Paul, no, we must talk for another 10 minutes, but I think we've run out of time, to be honest. We had 3 topics to talk about and a 4th topic just in case we didn't have enough to talk about. We only got through the first topic, folks. So next week, unless something big comes up over the next 10 days, we'll be talking about the New Zealand finances and the fact they spend something like 90 million a year on the head office. What? We'll be talking about what Super Rugby could look like going forwards and we'll probably look at also, because we might even be down at level 2 this time next week. Who knows? We'll look at the level 2 and level 1 guidelines for rugby and what may or may not happen in New Zealand, because we may get, if we get down to level 2, we could have Super Rugby in the near future. Who knows? What a scary thought. Actual sport to watch. Could you cope with that, Stephen? John, would you hold out or heart attack with this?
Could do with some sport at the moment. The morning sports brief actually needs some sport at the minute.
Thank you very much, boys. Don't forget, everyone, please do like, subscribe to the Facebook page of New Zealand Sport Radio. That is our primary place. Even though we are also going out on YouTube and Twitter. And thank you everyone who's been on the live chat on YouTube tonight. It's been very lively there. Also, you can listen to the podcast, which just search for New Zealand Sport Radio on iTunes, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, or your favorite podcatcher. It would be great to have you listening to be in your ears whilst you're doing the housework or driving your car around town. But don't crash, please. Do concentrate on the road. Loving your work, boys. Thank you very much for joining me, and catch you all next week on the Hash Rugby Chat and at 8 a.m. every morning with the morning sports briefing.
Thanks, Paul.